June 4, 1942, 10:22 a.m., 240 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. The sky is a pale, cloudless vault stretching endlessly over the Pacific, and beneath it, the Imperial Japanese Navy's first air fleet steams forward in tight formation. Aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, a steel armada that has crushed every enemy in its path for 6 months. On the flight deck of the carrier Akagi, Commander Mitsuo Fushide stands among rows of aircraft being hastily returned. Bombs are being swapped for torpedoes, torpedoes for bombs. The deck crews work in organized chaos, fuel hoses snaking across, wood planking, ordnance carts clattering, voices shouting over the thunder of idling engines. Then, from the gray void above, the first American dive bomber appears. It is a lone SBD, dauntless, wings tilted, falling in a near-vertical plunge. Then another, then 10, then 30. The sky splits open. Fushida looks up and sees death descending, in disciplined formation, and in that instant, he understands. The Americans have found them first. Mitsuo Fuchida, personal account, Midway, the battle that doomed Japan. 1955. The first bomb strikes Akagi amidships at 10:26 a.m., tearing through the wooden flight deck and detonating among the armed and fueled aircraft waiting to launch. The explosion is immediate, catastrophic. Fuel ignites, ordnance cooks off, men are thrown into the air. Within seconds, the carrier is a roaring inferno. Across the formation, the Kaga takes multiple hits. The Soryu erupts in flame. The pride of the Imperial Navy carriers that bombed Pearl Harbor, savaged the Philippines, terrorized the Indian Ocean, burns under the bright Pacific sun, reduced to floating pyres in less than 6 minutes. U.S. Navy Action Report, June 1942. Japanese lookouts stare upward, stunned, unable to comprehend how American aircraft found them without warning, how enemy pilots coordinated across hundreds of miles of open ocean, how an ambush of this precision was even possible. So radio nets crackle with panic. Officers demand answers. There are none. In the span of a morning, the calculus of the Pacific War has been rewritten, and Japanese commanders will spend the rest of the conflict haunted by a single, inescapable question. How did the Americans know? 6 months earlier, the Imperial Japanese Navy was the most feared naval force on the planet. On December 7, 1941, 6 carriers launched over 350 aircraft against Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet in under 2 hours. Japanese Naval General Staff Records, December 1941. In the months that followed, Japanese forces stormed through Southeast Asia and the Pacific with terrifying speed. Wake Island fell. Guam fell. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies all collapsed under the weight of synchronized amphibious assaults, carrier strikes, and aggressive combined fleet doctrine. By April 1942, Japan controlled an empire stretching from the Aleutians to the Indian Ocean, a defensive perimeter larger than any in history. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor strike, believed the Americans demoralized, scattered, incapable of mounting effective resistance for at least a year. Interrogation of Japanese officers. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. His intelligence officers reported that American carrier strength in the Pacific was minimal, perhaps 1 or 2 operational carriers at most. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized aggressive offensive action, carrier concentration, and the element of surprise. It worked flawlessly. Until Midway, the Americans, by contrast, were bloodied, outmatched, and scrambling. By June 1942, the U.S. Pacific Fleet had only 3 operational carriers: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, the latter hastily patched together at Pearl Harbor after taking bomb damage at the Battle of the Coral Sea. Just weeks earlier, U.S. Navy repair logs, May 1942. American doctrine was still being written in real time. Lessons learned in desperate actions across the Coral Sea and in scattered skirmishes near New Guinea. Pilots were green. Equipment was untested. Torpedo bombers, the Douglas TBD, devastated, obsolete, slow, vulnerable. Their torpedoes notorious for running too deep or failing to detonate. The odds were stacked catastrophically against the United States. Japanese carriers outnumbered them. Japanese pilots had more combat experience. Japanese naval leadership had momentum, morale, and a 6-month winning streak. On paper, the battle of Midway should have been another Japanese victory, another stepping stone toward forcing the Americans to the negotiating table. But the Americans possessed something the Japanese did not anticipate, something invisible, something that would turn the tide of the entire Pacific campaign before the first bomb even fell. In early May 1942, U.S. Navy cryptanalysts working in the basement of the 14th Naval District, headquarters at Pearl Harbor, intercepted and partially decrypted Japanese naval communications detailing a major operation against a target designated AF National Security Agency Historical Report. The role of command in the Battle of Midway, 1985, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team at Station HYPO worked around the clock, breaking Imperial Navy code JN25, piecing together fragments of transmissions, correlating call signs, traffic patterns, and linguistic clues. They deduced that AF was Midway Atoll. To confirm, they orchestrated a ruse. Midway was instructed to send a plain language radio message reporting a breakdown in its freshwater distillation plant. Within days, Japanese communications referenced AF experiencing water supply issues. The Americans now knew the target, the timing, and the composition of the Japanese fleet. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, positioned his carriers northeast of Midway in a coordinated ambush, hidden, patient, lethal sink-pack command summary. May-June 1942. The Japanese sailed into the largest intelligence trap of the war, unaware that every move had been anticipated, that American dive bombers were already waiting in the sky, that the element of surprise, their most cherished weapon, turned against them. And so, on the morning of June 4th, when Commander Fushida looked up and saw the American dive bombers falling from the sun, it was not luck, not accident, not coincidence. It was the culmination of invisible labor cryptanalysts, radio operators, intelligence officers who gave American pilots the single advantage that no armor, no firepower, no doctrine could overcome. But the question remained, haunting Japanese admirals in the days and months to come. If the Americans could see through the fog of war at Midway, what else could they see? What other secrets had been laid bare? And how could any fleet, any operation, any battle plan ever succeed again, when the enemy seemed to know everything before it happened? The answer to that question would reshape not just naval warfare, but the entire nature of modern combat, and it began in the silent, smoke-filled rooms, where men like Joseph Rochefort waged a war the Japanese never knew existed. The secret weapon that shattered Japanese confidence at Midway was not steel, not firepower, not carrier-based aircraft, it was information. While Japanese commanders relied on radio discipline, codebook secrecy, and operational deception, American cryptanalysts had penetrated the Imperial Navy's most sensitive communications system months before the battle even began. The operation was centered at Station HYPO, a cramped, windowless basement beneath the 14th Naval District Administration Building at Pearl Harbor, where Commander Joseph Rochefort and a team of fewer than 40 linguists, mathematicians, and radio intercept specialists worked in shifts around the clock, decrypting Japanese naval code JN25 BNSA report, SRH-230, History of GYP-1, 1978. The code itself was a substitution cipher overlaid with an additive system. Messages were encoded using a codebook of approximately 45,000 five-digit groups, then enciphered again using random numerical additives from a separate book. Breaking it required not brute force, but pattern recognition, traffic analysis, and an encyclopedic understanding of Japanese naval terminology, procedure, and psychology. Rochefort's team identified repeated phrases, recognized call signs for specific ships and air groups, cross-referenced intercepts with known operations, and slowly reconstructed fragments of meaning from static and cipher. By May 1942, they could read roughly 15% of intercepted Japanese naval trafficker fraction, but enough latent, and I was there, 1985, enough to see the shape of Yamamoto's plan, enough to know Midway was the target, enough to turn the Pacific War on its axis. Japanese intelligence officers believed their codes were unbreakable. Radio transmissions were short, tightly controlled, transmitted on varying frequencies to avoid interception. Operational security was rigorous, yet they underestimated the scale and sophistication of American signals. Intelligence. U.S. Navy listening posts stretched across the Pacific, Hawaii, Guam before its fall. Intercept stations in the Aleutians, Australia. even aboard submarines trailing Japanese task forces. U.S. Navy Communications Intelligence Summary. 1942. High-frequency direction finding HFDF allowed American operators to triangulate the position of Japanese transmitters based on signal strength and bearing, plotting fleet movements even when messages could not be fully decrypted. Technical Manual, OpenAV, 34p3, 1943. Traffic analysis, a study of who was communicating with whom, how often, and at what times revealed operational patterns. When radio traffic spiked among carriers, battleships, and supply vessels, American analysts knew a major operation was imminent. When specific call signs associated with Admiral Nagumo's carrier divisions appeared in coordinated transmissions, the target and timing became clear. The Japanese were fighting blind. The Americans were watching every move. Admiral Yamamoto's confidence was rooted in his belief that American carriers were scattered, demoralized, incapable of concentrated response. Japanese intelligence estimated only 1 or 2 U.S. carriers in the Central Pacific. Japanese Naval Intelligence Estimate, May 1942. In reality, Nimitz had positioned all 3 Enterprise Hornet and the hastily repaired Yorktown northeast of Midway in a coordinated ambush point designated Point Luck, precisely where Rochefort's decrypts predicted the Japanese fleet would approach. Sink-Pack War Diary, June 1942. The carriers operated under strict radio silence, relying on pre-arranged patrol sectors and visual signals to avoid detection. Japanese scout planes, launched late due to catapult malfunctions aboard the cruiser Tone, failed to spot the American task force until it was too late. Japanese after-action report. Battle of Midway, June 1942. When Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade, leading 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise, finally located the Japanese fleet at 10:20 a.m. on June 4. The enemy carriers were in their most vulnerable configuration, flight decks crowded with armed and fueled aircraft, crews frantically rearming bombers for a second strike on Midway, ordnance carts scattered everywhere. McCluskey, Action Report, June 6, 1942. The Americans attacked without warning, from altitude, with devastating precision. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were burning wrecks within minutes. The 4th carrier, Haryu, launched a retaliatory strike that crippled Yorktown, but was herself located and destroyed by dive bombers from Enterprise that afternoon. By nightfall, 4 Japanese carriers, the core of the combined fleet's striking power, lay at the bottom of the Pacific. American losses: 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 150 aircraft, 307 men. U.S. Navy Casualty List, June 1942. Japanese losses: 4 carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, 3,057 men, including hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots. Japanese Naval Records, 1942. The kill ratio was catastrophic. The strategic implications were incalculable. Japanese commanders were shattered, not just by the loss, but by the manner of the loss. A dramatized composite interrogation of captured Japanese officers later revealed a recurring theme: disbelief. "We did not understand how they found us," one staff officer stated. "Our codes were secure. Our reconnaissance was thorough, yet they were waiting, positioned perfectly, as if they had read our orders." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey interrogation. No. 317, 1945. Another officer described the psychological impact. "After Midway, every operation felt exposed. We could not trust our communications. We could not trust our assumptions. The Americans seemed to anticipate our movements, counter our strategies before we even executed them." USSB's interrogation. No. 422, 1946. The fear was not irrational. In the months following Midway, American codebreakers continued to penetrate Japanese communications. Operation Igo, Yamamoto's April 1943 air offensive against Guadalcanal and New Guinea, was anticipated and countered, most catastrophically when Rochefort's successors at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific decrypted an itinerary for Yamamoto's inspection tours or forward bases in the Solomon Islands. The information was passed directly to Admiral Nimitz, who authorized a long-range interception mission. On April 18, 1943, 16 P-38 Lightning fighters from the 339th Fighter Squadron, led by Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber, ambushed Yamamoto's transport aircraft over killing the architect of Pearl Harbor in a precisely coordinated assassination. made possible entirely by Broken Code's mission report. 339th Fighter Squadron, April 1943. The message to every Japanese commander was unmistakable. Nowhere was safe. No plan was secret. The Americans were always listening. But intelligence alone could not win battles. The advantage had to be translated into action by pilots willing to dive into anti-aircraft fire, by carrier crews working 72-hour shifts, by maintenance teams keeping obsolete aircraft flying through exhaustion and resourcefulness. At Midway, American torpedomen from Torpedo Squadron 8 flew obsolete TBD Devastators into point-blank range of Japanese flak, losing all but one aircraft, buying time for dive bombers to strike unopposed. Torpedo Squadron 8 Action Report, June 1942. Damage control parties aboard Yorktown fought fires, patched hull breaches, restored power after bomb hits, keeping the carrier operational long enough to recover aircraft before finally succumbing. Hours later, Yorktown Damage Control Report, June 1942. The victory was built on invisible labor and visible sacrifice, on cryptanalysts who never saw combat and pilots who never returned, on intelligence that gave American forces one irreplaceable gift: the ability to see the enemy before the enemy saw them. And that gift, once understood by Japanese commanders, became a specter that haunted every operation, every transmission, every battle plan for the remainder of the war. A creeping, corrosive certainty that no matter how carefully they prepared, the Americans would always know first. The psychological fracture that began at Midway did not heal. It deepened. In the months and years following the battle, Japanese naval commanders operated under a shadow of paranoia that corroded operational effectiveness from within. Every radio transmission became suspect. Every plan seemed compromised before execution. Communications discipline tightened to the point of operational paralysis. Hesitated to relay critical intelligence, fearing interception would turn information into a weapon against them. Japanese Naval Staff Communications Directive, August 1942. Yet silence brought its own failures. During the prolonged Guadalcanal campaign, Japanese resupply convoys, dubbed the Tokyo Express by Americans, operated under strict radio silence, relying on prearranged schedules and visual signals. American codebreakers still tracked them. Coastwatcher networks radioed sightings. Radar-equipped destroyers ambushed them in the darkness. U.S. Navy South Pacific Combat Intelligence Summary, October 1942. On the night of November 30, 1942, during the Battle of Tassofa, Japanese destroyers inflicted brutal losses on American cruisers in a surface engagement, sinking one and crippling three others, but the convoy they escorted was decimated. Supplies lost. The strategic mission, a failure. Action report. Task Force 67, December 1942. The tactical victory meant nothing. The Americans knew the schedule. They knew the route. They were always waiting. Japanese commanders began to suspect treachery within their own ranks, interrogating staff officers, rotating personnel, implementing labyrinthian security protocols that slowed decision-making and bred mistrust. USSB's Interrogation No. 531, 1946. The invisible enemy was not American carriers, it was doubt. American intelligence operations expanded relentlessly throughout 1943 and 1944, leveraging not only code-breaking but also submarine reconnaissance, aerial photography, and captured documents. Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne, working in coordination with Station HYPO's successor units, decrypted Japanese Army codes, revealing troop movements, supply shipments, and defensive preparations across New Guinea and the Philippines. Frommel Intelligence Summaries, 1943 to 1944. Submarine patrols, guided by decrypted convoy routes, devastated Japanese merchant shipping. By 1944, over 60% of Japan's merchant tonnage lay at the bottom of the Pacific, choking the home islands of oil, steel, food, and raw materials. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, The War Against Japanese Transportation, 1947. Each sinking reinforced the Japanese perception of American omniscience. Convoys sailing under radio silence were torpedoed. Supply routes altered at the last minute were still intercepted. Reinforcement schedules known only to senior staff were anticipated and countered. The psychological impact on Japanese logistics officers was devastating. A dramatized composite account from a captured transport commander described the fatalism. We knew before we sailed that the Americans would find us. It was only a question of when. Every voyage felt like a death sentence. Morale collapsed not from battle, but from inevitability. USSB's Interrogation No. 609, 1945. By late 1944, the Imperial Navy had effectively ceded control of the sea lanes. Japan's empire, vast and resource-rich on maps, was isolated, starving, unable to sustain offensive operations or adequately defend its perimeter. The human cost of maintaining America's intelligence advantage was borne by thousands whose names never appeared in headlines. Cryptanalysts at Arlington Hall, the U.S. Army's Signals Intelligence Center, worked 12-hour shifts in sweltering, overcrowded rooms, decrypting Japanese Army codes that revealed defensive positions during the Philippines campaign. NSA Historical Report. SRH 349, Japanese Army Operations, 1980. Radio intercept operators aboard submarines endured depth-charge attacks. While copying encrypted transmissions in freezing compartments. Submarine Force Pacific Intelligence Report. 1944. Traffic analysts in Melbourne processed thousands of intercepts daily, identifying patterns that revealed convoy schedules, troop movements, and command relationships. Engineers at Bell Laboratories and IBM developed electromechanical tabulating machines to accelerate code-breaking, building predecessors to modern computers that could process cipher permutations at unprecedented speed. IEEE, Annals of the History of Computing. Cryptanalytic machinery in World War II. 1982. Factory workers at manufacturing plants across the United States produced encryption devices, radio equipment, and direction-finding gear that armed American forces with technological superiority in signals warfare. The intelligence apparatus was an industrial-scale operation, employing tens of thousands, consuming vast resources, operating in absolute secrecy. Its success depended not on individual genius, but on coordination, infrastructure, and relentless methodical labor sustained across 4 years of war. The strategic impact extended beyond the Pacific. American success in signals intelligence influenced Allied operations in Europe, where ultra-decrypts of German Enigma and Lorentz ciphers provided comparable advantages against Wehrmacht and Kriegsmarine forces. F. H. Hinsley. British intelligence in the Second World War. 1993. The integration of intelligence into operational planning became standard doctrine. Commanders at every level, from theater commanders down to destroyer, squadron leaders received decrypted intelligence summaries, enabling them to position forces, anticipate enemy movements, and exploit vulnerabilities in real time. The concept of information dominance as a decisive factor in modern warfare was born in the basement rooms where Rochefort's team worked and matured. Across every theater of World War II, assessments concluded that Allied signals intelligence shortened the war in the Pacific by at least 1 year, saving hundreds of thousands of lives and preventing a catastrophic invasion of the Japanese home islands. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. Summary Report. Pacific War, 1946. The Japanese never fully understood the extent of the penetration. Even after surrender, many officers believed their defeats resulted from material inferiority, not compromised communications. The truth remained classified for decades. The legacy of Midway and the intelligence war that followed reshaped Cold War doctrine, embedding signals intelligence and communications security into the foundation of modern military strategy. The National Security Agency, established in 1952, inherited the personnel, methods, and institutional knowledge developed during World War II. NSA, declassified history. The creation of NSA 2008, American investments in satellite reconnaissance, electronic warfare, and secure communications systems during the Cold War were direct extensions of lessons learned against Japan. During the Gulf War in 1991, coalition forces achieved similar information dominance through satellite imagery, signals intercepts, and communications jamming, rendering Iraqi command and control ineffective before ground operations even began. U.S. Department of Defense. Conduct of the Persian Gulf War, 1992. The principle remained unchanged. The side that sees first, knows first, and acts first, holds an advantage no amount of armor or firepower can overcome. Modern network-centric warfare, drone surveillance, and cyber operations are evolutionary descendants of the intelligence apparatus forged in the Pacific. Admiral Nip, reflecting on the Battle of Midway years later, stated simply, Midway was essentially a victory of intelligence. Nimitz, Command, Summary, 1966. It was also a revelation. Japanese commanders learned, too late, that in modern war the most dangerous enemy is not the one you can see, but the one who sees you first, who reads your intentions, who turns your own words into weapons, who waits in silence while you transmit in ignorance. The fear American sailors instilled in Japanese commanders was not born of superior ships or braver men. It was born from the haunting, inescapable realization that every plan, every movement, every secret had been laid bare, and that no ocean was wide enough to hide from an enemy who had learned to see through fog, distance, and cipher. The lesson endures. In the calculus of modern conflict, information is not merely an advantage, it is the battlefield itself. And those who control it do not merely win battles. They decide, before the first shot is fired, who will fight blind and who will fight with open eyes.